The film you're about to watch is not an attempt to prove or disprove any particular aspect of the UFO phenomenon. It is a presentation of information and witness testimony, along with some analysis with the intention of getting closer to the truth on this vast subject. Let's start by stating that many people in high places are UFO believers, or at the very least are open-minded on the subject. In October 2012, Prince Philip instructed his aide, Captain Richard Hutton, to write in response to a Rich Planet viewer. His Royal Highness continues to keep an open mind on the subject of UFOs. For the last 2.5 years I've been collecting UFO reports from members of the public. The Rich Planet website, which is promoted by the Rich Planet TV show and hence receives around 1,700 visitors a day, has a page dedicated for visitors to report their UFO sightings. Witnesses are required to fill in many specific fields. This enables me to capture every aspect of the person's experience. A report like this one is then generated. Further dialogue can then be conducted with the witness, and in some cases a recorded interview. Before I describe what is being reported, it's important to point out some of the objects often seen in our skies which are easily mistaken for a UFO. These are Chinese lanterns and have become very popular for letting off at parties and special occasions. They are usually let off in groups of 5 or 6 and move silently across the sky, emitting an orangey glow. I filmed these Chinese lanterns over Torquay in 2009. They will generally all move in the same direction according to the prevailing wind. Many of the UFO reports I've so far received have been rejected because what is described is similar to lanterns. In this example, the witness states, "Steady moving orange UFO at a few thousand feet altitude over house heading west. It never flashed or flickered like a lantern or a plane and made no noise." Then, after 5 minutes, another identical one followed. In total, there was about 5 minutes interval between each one. Reports like this one have to go straight in the bin, as it is far too likely they are simply lanterns. Another aerial object which has become increasingly popular over recent years is the model aircraft. They don't all look like aircraft, and some of the maneuvers which can be achieved by relatively inexpensive models are quite incredible, using high-powered, electronically controlled propellers. Model aircraft are often fitted with coloured LED lights, so one can imagine what this small multi-rotor aircraft would look like at night if it was lit up. Before we look at some witness testimony, I want to make a simple point about this much misunderstood subject. The major area of contention and controversy with the UFO issue is whether or not non-human, some say alien entities are responsible for some of the unidentified objects. The most popular argument used by people claiming that UFO craft cannot be of non-human origin is that the distance to the nearest star would mean it impossible for them to travel here. Quite a narrow viewpoint in my eyes. Firstly, because it assumes we know everything there is to know about physics and the universe, which we undoubtedly do not. And secondly, it ignores the possibility that there are bases on or near the Earth which could have been here for millennia. There is, however, a third possibility in this argument, which people who haven't delved into the subject are usually oblivious to. This is that some UFO craft may have their origins in some kind of collaboration of the two. It is widely claimed by many there have been technology exchanges between one or more outside groups and the US military. So it could be that UFOs witnessed are human-controlled but utilize outside technology, or that the military are party to non-human craft being flown by ETs in some kind of joint project. The testimony for such possibilities is extensive, and I would recommend these 3 books for starters. The first, written by Philip J. Corso, a retired US Army lieutenant, describes how a top-secret group took control of the famous Roswell craft, recovered in New Mexico in the summer of 1947. Critics often say, if they are so advanced, how come they are crashing in the desert? It has been claimed the military were experimenting with a new type of radar beam in that area in 1947, and that it may have interfered with the craft's propulsion or navigation systems. Corso goes on to describe that the purpose of the project he was involved with was to examine the recovered craft they had acquired in order to learn about the technology, and even introduce some of the technology to certain corporations within the military-industrial complex. The second book includes testimony from physicist Bob Lazar, who made detailed claims in 1989 about a specific area within the infamous Area 51, known as S4, where he claimed 9 different types of extraterrestrial craft were being stored, and there were ongoing projects to decipher how these craft's propulsion systems operate. Lazar's testimony has recently been corroborated with information given to Richard Dolan from an ex-CIA official who visited the facility under instructions from President Eisenhower. The third book is written by retired US Army Sergeant Dan Sherman, who was drafted into a top-secret NSA communications project in the 1980s. He claims that in 1961 the NSA started a joint project with a group of extraterrestrials involving advanced methods of what he describes as intuitive communication.
When I was initially brought into the program, they referred to it as a slant mission. They referred to it as a gray. So
But they also told you that aliens were involved.
Yeah, when he described the onion effect with the security classifications, he mentioned that the black projects, were at a certain level, and then gray projects, which have to do with alien technology, research and development, or communication. Any of those things, they were classified as a gray project.
Right. Okay. And
he mentioned that the project itself had kicked off in, I believe he said 1961.
All right.
And they started to abduct human females for testing for this genetic procedure that they were going to conduct. And when I say they, it was a joint project with the alien race, whatever you want to call it, and the American government. Yes.
And you said it was joint, so you think that, because you describe it as a military abduction, so it's not necessarily military, it's a joint thing. So do you think, you think it's the alien technology that was being used for the abduction rather than the military technology?
Oh yeah, I think, let me back up here. The actual abductions themselves were conducted by the aliens.
Right.
And the procedures were done by the aliens. I say it was in conjunction with the military because the military knew about it.
Dan Sherman's story is very detailed, and he is a highly credible whistleblower. It's difficult to dismiss all the claims of alleged ET collaboration out of hand. The Roswell event, for example, has produced many reliable accounts. When considering UFO reports, we must not fall into the age-old argument, was it an alien ship or was it a human ship? We might be overlooking a third possibility, that their origin is in part alien and in part human. In fact, it doesn't really matter what camp you are in. I am happy for your belief to reside in whichever part of this diagram you choose, because the testimony in this film will show there are vehicles in our skies whose characteristics cannot be explained by the science in our publicly available physics and engineering textbooks. Somebody is flying silent aerial vehicles on a fairly regular basis in many locations around the UK without the consent of the public, and everyone should be concerned about this. Everyone. Another factor we need to consider is the advanced aircraft that have undoubtedly been developed, usually for the US military, by the secretive Lockheed Skunk Works. One commentator who speaks about many of the prototype craft that have been designed or developed is Michael Schratt. Some of the declassified craft designed in the 1980s make the mind boggle. For example, version 2 of the TAV will go in a low Earth orbit, can orbit the Earth 3 times without refueling, and can travel from Los Angeles to Melbourne in 55 minutes. They have also designed nuclear power craft, and another secret craft, the B-2 bomber, once airborne, is alleged to be able to switch into an electric mode, possibly utilizing silent anti-gravitic propulsion. It's also worth noting here that the sheer variety and exoticness of the secret aircraft designed and developed by Lockheed, which have so far been declassified, suggests they may be decades ahead of the technologies developed by NASA in their rocket programs. When people see a UFO, and others suggest it may have been a secret American aircraft, the response is often, why on earth would they be testing a secret aircraft over some mundane part of the UK? This 1997 article alleges that in Hampshire in 1994 a top-secret US spy plane which flies at the edge of space at 5 times the speed of sound crashed at the British experimental airbase Boscombe Down. The SAS was scrambled to throw down a cordon round the wreckage. The aircraft was believed to have been the Astra or Aurora, a craft which to this day the US military still denies exists. Michael Schratt also claims another secret aircraft crashed on the East German border region in 1989.
The only known illustration of a top-secret aircraft that crashed in the East German border region during the first month of the Bush Sr. administration had a crew of 2 that sat tandem. Now I'm proposing that this was a Lockheed design just for the fact that you can see the same faceted flat plate technology used on the F-117. It had 3 balls. There were 2 up front, 1 in the aft section, and when this particular aircraft crashed that you'll see right here, there was a hull breach on the port side, and then near the aft section of the hull there was a crack or bent at about a 15-degree angle. One of these balls popped out, was later recovered by crew. It had the consistency of a pineapple or a seashell, and there was a interesting gold braid embedded into these balls. And when these gentlemen recovered one of these spheres and they put this box around it, this box actually popped up on its own. So it had some residual effects still going on.
Bear in mind, this is only Michael Schratt's opinion that this was a Lockheed aircraft. He does not know for sure it was of that origin. So we know from these incidents that undisclosed aircraft are flown over Europe and the UK without the knowledge of our elected Parliament. From August 2010 to December 2012, Rich Planet has received 350 separate UFO reports. Of these I have discarded 188, over half, because either the information in the report suggests something conventional, or there is not enough information to draw any conclusion. Out of the 162 reports remaining, I have interviewed 25 witnesses by telephone and recorded 12 video interviews. I also interviewed some prominent UK UFO researchers. I've categorized the sightings into spheres, black triangles and disks, and split these up again into different sizes. The small sphere is often described as the size of a football, which we will come on to. Medium would be bigger than a car, and a large sphere would be anything larger than a house. The large sphere would be the category of what was seen in the famous 1974 Berwyn Mountain UFO incident, and I have 15 similar sightings of such objects. The black triangle reports can also be split into 2 broad sizes. The large triangles are invariably described, incredibly, as being the size of a football pitch. The smaller category ranges anywhere from around 30 to 100 feet. We have a number of classic flying saucer cases, one of which I will be describing in detail later in the film. I'm going to look at black triangle cases first, but before we listen to some witnesses, let's just give a quick history of black triangle UFOs. The earliest triangle case I have in my files is from 1976, and it does seem that from the 1980s onwards they have become more prevalent, starting with the Hudson Valley Flap in 1981. A district of New York State where many witnesses saw totally silent triangular craft with coloured lights hovering over houses and roads. Another wave of black triangles appeared in Belgium in 1990. The Belgian Air Force scrambled F-16 fighters to try and intercept them, but were outmanoeuvred every time. After days of activity, the Belgian Air Force had no explanation, and to this day still have no explanation as to the origin of the triangular UFOs. After the events, an investigation was launched, and the airborne radar tapes from the F-16s were given to radar expert Professor Emil Schweitzer. Schweitzer ruled out any form of radar anomaly and concluded the radar systems were tracking real objects. Calculations were carried out on the data, and in one manoeuvre the triangular craft turned a sharp corner, resulting in an acceleration of 30 g. That's 30 times greater than the Earth's gravity. This would be impossible for a conventional aircraft, and any occupants would be dead. Incredibly, in 1991, Schweitzer was asked by the British Ministry of Defence to come over to the UK to give British military chiefs a briefing on the movements of this unknown craft and explain the radar data. We know this because Schweitzer himself told researcher Harry Harris when Harris managed to get an interview with him in his hotel whilst in the UK.
What I found by calculations starting from the data recorded by the pilot, that the UFO made at one point of its trajectory a very strange motion. And during that very strange motion, the normal acceleration was, let's say, above 30 Gs. Yes. So the trajectory was, first of all, the UFO was flying almost level, and then suddenly made a 90-degree motion. At that point, where he made a 90-degree turn, that point, the normal acceleration was above 30 Gs. Climbed almost vertically, and then descended obliquely to the ground. During the oblique descent, the UFO was flying supersonic.
Is it reasonable to assume that there couldn't have been anything living in that machine, that UFO, as we understand life?
I would say that with the present human technology, that's impossible.
The MOD have never publicly admitted they requested a meeting with Schweitzer. The UK too has had its fair share of black triangle activity. Notably in 1988, a wave known as the Staffordshire Flap occurred at Cannock Chase. In March 1997, the Sheffield UFO incident took place, which has been tirelessly researched by Max Burns, who uncovered evidence that fighter jets were again scrambled to chase this silent triangular UFO. The UFO was seen by multiple reliable witnesses that evening along its path. Although the Air Force has never admitted it, evidence showed that one of their jets crashed while chasing the triangular UFO. Max Burns has recovered aircraft parts from the incident and located the spot where the aircraft came down. Questions were asked in Parliament, but again, the MOD continues to cover up this incident. These cases are just the tip of an iceberg of silent flying triangle incidents. Many cases have been diligently documented by veteran UFO researcher Omer Fowler, many of which have taken place in Derbyshire.
December 94 to May 95, we had 52 flying triangle incidents over Derby. We had one less than a mile from this very spot,
Right.
where one hovered over a traffic island in the middle of the rush hour, 6:30ish at night, and the traffic was queued up, usual sort of thing, and one driver happened to be patiently waiting for the traffic to move, happened to glance up, and there was a huge black triangle hovering over the traffic island, just studying the traffic.
Right. The craft are almost always silent, black, and usually with 3 lights in the corners and sometimes 1 red light in the centre. Let's take a look at a few of the testimonies from witnesses reporting their cases to Rich Planet.
I noticed a yellowy orangey light just to my side then. I thought, oh, there's no street light out there. I thought it was a street light at first, so I sort of did a double take, and I saw 3 orangey yellow lights, and they were sort of moving in towards each other. These lights sort of moved in and until they disappeared, and then they seemed to be replaced by just random dots of light, which were sort of moving. So I would imagine that they were all on a huge craft that was actually turning, and then these lights were coming towards me, and as it come towards me and it took shape, it was a triangle, a big huge triangle with the lights all the way around the edge, and it went over my flat, and it ended up me out of my flat window with my mobile phone trying to get a photograph of the thing.
Were the lights just along the sides or were they on the corners? Just
I'd say no more than 8 on each side.
Right, okay.
I think there were fewer on the back side of it, and there was 1 red one in the centre.
1 red one
well.
in the centre,
Yeah.
and
3 white lights with a red flashing light. But what struck me most was it seemed to be still. It seemed to be completely still. It was like maybe 4 to 5 hours high, if you get me. But what I noticed is it was sort of rotating like that. That's why these lights that's why these lights looked like they were going into each other, but they weren't, because it was like a solid object.
I looked up first and I saw this massive, great big black triangle sitting in there, and it wasn't. It seemed to be absorbing the light. You could see it against the light pollution. This thing, it's the size of it's massive, like a great big football field.
So it was blacker than the surrounding sky.
It was blacker than the sky.
Right.
That's how we could see it.
And give me an estimate of size, Dean.
Well, it must have been like bigger than a football field.
It must have been at least a football field in size. It was huge. The height, I think, was about 3 or 4 houses high.
Right.
Heading towards north-northwest from south-southeast.
Right.
And then it kind of moved backwards towards me, if you know what I mean. But like really slow and smooth, and that's why I knew that's not an aeroplane, if you know what I mean. It was like really slow and smooth, like backwards like that, and then it moved forwards like that way, and then it sort of just did that a few times, and then just headed off.
Right.
But there were no sound at all. That's what was weird.
The craft was going like that,
right,
and turning round. Eventually those lights on the back disappeared, and I could just see it like a cluster of lights, and the cluster of lights were moving, and then they all started coming towards me like that, and as it got closer and started going above, I could see then it was a triangle.
It was absolutely massive, this thing. It had a white point of light. At each point there was a white piercing light, and in the centre was a small cluster of red and orange, like honeycomb arrangement of lights at the centre, just sitting there. I didn't see it move.
Nothing holding it up.
Nothing holding it up. I was looking. Yeah,
Did you hear any noise from it?
No. I mean, if there was a noise, I probably couldn't hear it because of the engine.
1 o'clock in the morning, I took the dog out into the garden for his last roll around. Far off in the distance I could see lights flashing. I thought it was a helicopter because of the speed it was travelling at. But the lights were not as a helicopter normally is. They weren't strobing, but it made no sound. And I'm thinking, well, what the hell is this? And this one leading light with the 2 following, and it didn't split up, it was just one. It appeared to be just one solid object.
It headed off towards Ackworth, which if you go to Ackworth you eventually end up in Rotherham,
right,
if you keep going. And then a few days later, that's when I saw that thing in the newspaper,
right,
which is like...
Now, before we go to that, just give us an estimate of the distance and the size.
If it were about 5 houses high, and then probably about 600 to 800 metres away from me.
Right. You've estimated in your witness statement...
About 30 metres-ish, if...
Right. In size?
Yeah, like length like that, 30 metres.
Right. So your sighting was on the 20th of October.
Yeah.
And then that was a Wednesday. The following Monday
I went back to work. I worked on nights at the time.
And there was a sighting of a UFO in Rotherham.
Yeah, in Rotherham, and it was a black triangle,
right,
apparently, they said. It just says, baffled residents helplessly shouted at the triangular craft as it crept above the South Yorkshire town.